Hello, it's time for our weekly factory talk, and this week time is the subject of our discussion. We're talking watches and watchmaking. My guest this week is Nick English from Bremont Watchmakers. Nick, it's great to talk to you. I said a very small bit about the company. Can you give us more about the history and the background to the company? It's quite an amazing story, and I have to say it's one tinged with a little bit of sadness, really.
Yes, thank you. Well, officially the company started back in 2002, and our first watches launched in 2007. But actually, the story goes back quite a lot longer than that. And I guess it started with our father. My brother and I started the business, Giles and myself. But it was our father, who was an aeronautical engineer, went to Cambridge, did his thesis there in PhD in aeronautical engineering. And just was passionate about making things, but passionate about engineering in general. So as children, we grew up in the workshop with him making things. So I think it was a form of cheap childcare. Our mother would dump us in the workshop and we'd do everything from story old cars, bikes, planes, aircraft we still fly today, musical instruments, really. Passion was also clocks. And then the other passion in our lives has always been flying, mostly historic aircraft. So our dad did a lot of, I suppose Giles and I and our father all sponsored through university by the Air Force. I think we all thought, Giles and I thought we were going to join the Air Force like our father a bit, but we ended up not doing that in the end and doing quite a lot of display flying. And our father used to do this in the 1980s and 1990s in historic aircraft. And as teenagers, we're lucky enough to get involved in that as well. And then during one practice in 1995, and flown with my father for a few months, but went out. It was a lovely March day, and we headed off to the airfield, which is North Wales. Took off, and long story short, something went wrong that day, and we ended up crashing, and he died, unfortunately, which was horrific. And my brother was waiting to take off in the next airplane, and I was in the aircraft with my father, and I ended up smashing myself up quite badly and breaking sort of 30, 40 bones. But for Giles and I, that was a bit of a tipping point in our lives, and it meant that life suddenly became quite short, and we wanted to go off and do something which is, rather important to us. Our father had always talked about, the incredible history of British watchmaking. If you go back, let me say, 200-300 years. The first ship chronometer built by an Englishman, 50-60% of the innovation in any mechanical watch came from British shores. And at the turn of the last century, probably 50% of all mechanical watches made in this country. So there is this history there, and it was a passion Giles and I always had.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? If you talk about watchmaking, whether it's a cliche or not, we always associate the Swiss with watches. But I wonder why that is, and because, as you said, there's a really good history of watchmaking in this country.
Yeah, no, do you know? And that's what our father used to talk to us about. It was a pretty amazing time. If you go back, as I said, to like sort of mid 1700s, it was John Harrison, a carpenter, funny enough, from Yorkshire, who designed the first timepiece capable of telling the time accurately at sea. As it was a competition set down by the British Admiralty, who had just lost 2,500 sailors off the coast of Finisterre. So, but it went back before then. Then you have the Marges, the Tompions, the Dents, the Grahams, the Arnolds. There are some incredible watchmakers, even the best from France. The likes of Breguet used to come over here and work with some of the British masters. So it was always there. And then, the world sets its time by Greenwich, doesn't it? So it's obviously there, stake in history, but we lost it gradually over 2 world wars. It wasn't about making watches, and if you could make a movement pass, you were called in to serve your country and make a plane or a gun or a firing pin for an Enfield rifle. So that's pretty much where it stopped. And the last company really to manufacture mechanical watches on any scale were probably Smiths in the 1960s.
We'll talk more about manufacturing in a moment, but if you forgive me for putting it this way, what's the sort of synchronicity then between aircraft manufacture, aircraft repairs, and watchmaking?
Yeah, aircraft and watches, no obvious connection other than time is obviously very important when you're navigating. But manufacturing a watch, a mechanical watch, the beautiful thing about it is if you service it, you look after it, it's going to be around for hundreds of years. And we're still flying airplanes that are 80 years old. So the similarity is there. And if you've got beautiful engineering, it will last forever if it's looked after. So I think that's sort of where it starts and stops, really. I mean, obviously the scale of parts is very, very different, but tolerances still come into play, and beautiful engineering plays out. So for us, there wasn't a natural, right, we've been restoring airplanes for a number of years, which Giles and I went and I did after a number of years, to running a business there, to making watches. But I think this general love of engineering played through.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I want to talk as well, because you're just about to move into a new facility in Henley, about the manufacturing processes. It is part of the reason for the move, because watchmaking, the processes are changing fundamentally, or do you still use the same techniques that have been in force for years, for decades, if not centuries, I suppose?
That's an interesting point, Richard. I think from some techniques are used, but what the Swiss did brilliantly at the turn of the century was say, right, look at the British, they're making beautiful, beautiful watches, but we did it in a very artisanal way. You get a group of 5 watchmakers making 10 beautiful watches a year. And the Swiss sort of said, actually, we can try doing this, but sort of almost take the Henry Ford model to cars, but take it over to watches and try and industrialize this manufacturing. And that's the key. That's the thing that changed. So for us as a brand to compete, Bremont does not want to make 10 watches a year. We want to make the highest quality chronometer watches we can, all mechanical, but we're making thousands. So it's a very different thing. And to do that, we've had to take on more of the processes used by the Swiss. So we have to industrialize, we have to mechanize quite a chunk of that.
How accurate then, I know this is a probably difficult one for you to answer, but how accurate is a watch? If you set it on January the 1st at midnight, 12 months later, how accurate will that watch still be?
Yeah, that's a very good point. Watches, it all depends on the watch. So you can have a mechanical watch and it can be out by minutes a day if you're not lucky. Bremont only produces chronometers. The chronometer has to go through independent testing, so you can't just produce a watch yourself and say, right, this is a chronometer. Our watches, our movements are all independently tested, and they have to be within +6 or -4 seconds a day. Now, when we set these watches and we send them out, we regulate them and we test them for many, many days and out. They will be set to probably run 2 or 3 seconds fast a day. Over time, the mainspring will gradually weaken, and we're talking years, 3 to 5 years, and that watch will gradually lose time a little bit. So we set it fast. Nobody minds a watch which is 2 or 3 seconds fast. Watch running slow is a bit more irritating. But you have to look for that denomination of chronometer to make sure your watch is going to be up to standard in terms of high quality timekeeping. Or you have to know the brand very well, and there are other chronometer marks, for example, the Geneva seal used by Patek, but you have to know what you're buying, basically.
Yeah, the watches you make, would you say they're principally a timepiece, or is it a piece of jewellery?
Oh, that's a very good point. It's interesting. When Giles and I started Bremont, we had a passion for vintage watches, and that was these beautiful sort of pilot's watches, these watches from the 1940s. The first proper, I suppose, military watches used were First World War, Second World War, and it's all about clarity. It's all about they're pieces of engineering, and I think that's, considering our background, I think that's what we found interesting. It wasn't about producing something which is so 2007 and would go out of date in 2 years' time. What we want to produce is a beautiful looking watch, and would pick it up in 20 years' time and say, actually, that's still a beautiful looking watch. So it doesn't become a thing of fashion; it becomes a thing of engineering. Now it has to be beautiful, and you can't just make a watch which tells the time but doesn't look great. If you're spending, for £3,000 plus. Some of our watches go for a lot more than that. You expect people to be able to almost get a magnifying glass and look at it. You can see the craftsmanship that's gone into it. So with one of our pillars of our brand, the first one is British engineering. We don't say British watchmaking, we say British engineering, because that's how we see ourselves. We see ourselves as an engineering company, almost.
We've spoken a lot about craftsmanship, about engineering. Tell us about the skills then that you look for people that come to work for you. Is there training? Are there apprenticeships?
Yeah, no, very good point. So there's two sides of the business, really, when it comes to the engineering. The first is literally running these big, CNC mill turning machines and special grinding machines and finishing machines, and down to really small tolerances. So you're looking at human hair is 50, 60 microns. We're machining down to 4 to 5 consistently on all movement and case parts. So we're talking very small tolerances. It's a different type of engineer needed for that. So running these machines, programming these machines, understanding these machines is one skill set. All over to the watchmakers. So when we set up Bremont in 2002, the first 3 years, Giles and I went over to Switzerland, and then we said, right, with a blank sheet of paper, what does it take to make a beautiful watch? And it took us 5 years. The worst thing is we told our wives it would take a year and a half. So we're sort of surreptitiously off to work. I was living in France for a bit, trying to get this thing to work. But we had to learn. The learning curve was huge, and the supply chain, understanding how it all worked, is incredibly difficult. And so it took a long, long time. The first 3 years of Bremont's life, actually, you can look at the dial, and the watches actually say Swiss made. It wasn't until 2009 when we had the knowledge base to bring, first of all, the assembly back to the UK, and then later, obviously, the manufacturing of parts. So with the assembly, you come back to the UK, where do you find watchmakers? So that's where we had to then train up people. And funny enough, there's two, again, you can then divide that into two sectors. For the watchmakers who assemble brand new watches, and for that we've trained up everyone in our business to do that. And we do bench tests. So someone may come and say, I'm really interested in becoming a watchmaker or a watch technician, and you'll literally see how they are. They may have come from any industry. So it may have been they may have straight from school, military background. They may have come from design. They may have been in jewelry manufacture. We've got all this sort of different, sectors of people that have come from into the watch technician side of the business. But we do a bench test, and you'll have 10 people, and you realise that only 2 of those 10 have the capability, and the hand-eye coordination is very, very important for that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then when it comes to the watchmaking, when I say watchmaking, more of the after sales and watch design, you're needing a lot of experience. And some of the guys would say probably on average have probably 20 years experience in that part of the business. But we're also training up a lot of people to go into that. And they may have spent a number of years as a watch technician. We send them off to British School of Watchmaking, which we sponsor, and we'll also train them in-house. And then they eventually become fully blown watchmakers. But they're quite different things. But the lovely thing is you've got this incredible learning curve, but also something to aim for as well, which is fantastic.
Yeah, you mentioned the British School of Watchmaking. For people which I am one of, that are not particularly aware of this, how long has this been going? Is this a reasonably new thing, and you say you sponsor it, or is it a facility that's been there for years and it's just passed me by?
No. Do you know, it's been there for a while, but it's based in Manchester. They only train sort of 8 to 10 students a year because it's quite small. They've got because it takes a long time and a lot of resource to train these new watchmakers. And basically, a group of brands, and this is pre-Bremont really, got together like Rolex, Watch Group, Richemont, LVMH, people like that. They got together and said, look, this is a dying art in this country. If we don't continue to train watchmakers, these are the big, the top 5 brands, How are we going to expect to service watches and keep things going in the UK? So they set this up, and they became sponsors of it. And then we were asked how long ago, probably 4 or 5 years ago, to get involved. And that's what we've done. And what's lovely is just every year we send a student or two there, take a couple of places, and they do very well because they've had a number of years putting the watches together already. So pretty much all the technical stuff they know already, and it's just the theoretics they have to sort of try and get to grips with. But it's a really great organisation, and we're very, very proud. And we are the only British sort of contingent involved, really.
Yeah, you say they take on 8 to 10 people a year. I mean, we're talking incredibly specialist people, and I'm interested that it's you send the people there rather than people go there and then come to you, really.
Well, yeah, because I'm passionate about this. Training is so very important. We have an incredible skill base in this country in so many areas of engineering, and yet we don't sing about it enough. We don't do enough with it. But for us, it's an honour to be able to get anyone on the course, obviously. But what people we're finding, what the British School of Watchmaking are finding, is that actually people who've done several years assembling watches at a company like Bremont in the UK, they have a much greater skill base than someone who's coming in from scratch, and so they do very, very well. In fact, the last couple of years, Bremont employees come top of the rankings, which is fantastic. And but we will send them there because they will have a year, or sometimes 2 years of nothing but theoretical training, and I think that's really, really important for us as a business if we want to grow, and if we want to innovate, and we want to continue to do the things we've done already. And then we have the sort of the final level of watchmaking, which is actually, can I go off from scratch and design a movement? And there's probably 1 or 2 people in the whole of the UK who are capable of doing that. Wow. And we've just developed a movement with an incredible guy called Stephen McDonald. And we've spent the last 4 or 5 years developing this movement, and hopefully prototypes will be coming out next year. But this will be a British workhorse movement, which is very, very exciting.
Finally, Nick, let's finish just by looking forward. We're all aware of how difficult things are at the moment, and probably will be for some time. Do you think, though, the business you're in is one that can ride this out? And looking beyond that, where do you see watchmaking in the UK going?
That's a very good question. I mean, it has been incredibly tough. I mean, as a business, for example, for us, it's a complex business. You're an engineering company, so you're designing the parts, you're machining the parts, you're a manufacturing company, you're putting these things together. But then the other part of the business, which is just as important, is you're a retailer. We have our own stores around the world. You sell through other stores, so we sell through a couple hundred stores around the world. And then the last bit, you have the best brand in the world, but if people don't know about it, you've got to market it. So you're a marketing company as well. Some of those parts of the business being affected a lot more than others. And you can imagine you're selling through your own boutiques. Every boutique in the world pretty much has been shut, and a lot of them still are. And take Hong Kong, take Melbourne, where we have our own stores. They're on lockdown again now, which is very, very hard. So what we had to do, we had to put a chunk of people on furlough, and then we had skeleton staff as well. And it's been really, really tough. It seems to be picking up, but then who knows what's going to happen with these. People talk about second waves coming, and obviously a bit of a ramp up again with COVID cases. So hopefully it's not going to be as bad as the first time. But I think to answer your question, in terms of whether a brand like Bremont or a mechanical watch brand has a future, I think so, because I think people's buying habits have changed, but we've found that people are still buying watches online. 30% of our business is selling to the military around the world. We still do that. And people, I think, disposable goods that come and go, I think they'll be a thing of the past eventually. And I think having that watch which your grandfather, your father's owned, passed down to you, and is going to last forever, is something very, very special. And that's what we're building for. It's for the long term, really, which is something I think more people are going to be accustomed to.
Nick, it's been really interesting, fascinating talking to you about an industry that I knew so little about. Thank you very much indeed, Nick English from Bremont Watchmaking. Thank you very much for talking to us today on Factory Talk. That's it for this week. We'll be back with another Factory Talk next week. Take care. Bye-bye.